Ladies and gentlemen, it seems like the Russia-Ukraine situation just keeps escalating. Very dubious considering the timing with Donald Trump coming in. And really, right after he won, it seemed like this war took a complete different path from the almost, was it over 2 year or around 2 year standstill that we were seeing from this war, with Russia very slowly moving the front to the west. But it seemed like inevitably it was going to come to an end with Donald Trump negotiating some type of peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, and Zelensky and Putin admitting that there was probably going to be a peace deal. Trump wins in emphatic fashion. It gives him potentially a lot of power, and we're seeing a lot of these NATO countries, likely, at least in my speculation, pressuring Biden to have maybe a different outlook on this war and give Ukraine more things like the missiles that were used from the United States, from France. Now we're getting new updates here. France and the United Kingdom are considering sending troops to Ukraine. Of course, there already are the North Korean troops in Russia helping them. What a total mess this is turning into. And again, this is right after Donald Trump won. I'm going to break this down. What does it mean? And why is war in the 21st century really all about leverage? Well, it's about leverage because of nuclear bombs and the threat of using them. And that's what Vladimir Putin always threatens and always says he has at his disposal. Now, I would say that there's a little bit of a difference between the United States' best interests and a lot of these European countries' best interests. I think that's why there's a disconnect right now within NATO and a lot of the specifically Republicans in the United States not really wanting to be involved with this war, more of an isolationist attitude. That's for a number of reasons. With liberals, they'll give the point and say, well, they're doing it because they're selfish. They're just obsessed with themselves. They're going to let Russia take over all of Europe. All of that's completely false. I mean, you could argue, yes, they are American first, but it's more nuanced than that. And people say, well, what about all these Republicans? They loved war. They loved influencing other nations. I mean, that's at a different time. We're talking about nuclear bombs now being readily available. That's something that you have to take into account. And the Republican point of view is very simple. We're not going to go to World War III over an area of land in eastern Ukraine. And of course, NATO, the European countries, because of where they're located on the same area of land as Russia, they're landlocked together. They're going to have a lot different of a viewpoint. They're going to say, well, this is appeasement, and this is going to enable and embolden Putin to take more land. I mean, Putin already annexed Crimea under Obama, and you really didn't hear anyone saying, oh, that's appeasement. I mean, I'm sure some of them did, but there was already an annexation that happened under a Democrat president, and now we've got the invasion happening under Biden. We'll see what happens with Trump, but there's a clear difference. And listen, I want to have a good relationship with Europe. I really do. It seems like those people are waking up. You can see in the UK, they've got a petition going, over 2 million signatures, to try and have an emergency election because of how unpopular that prime minister is, what they were doing with the riots and everything like that. His approval rating is like -40 right now. Those people, I know people say it's a lost cause because of the UK with the amount of immigrants in that country, but those people are waking up. They really are. And the way that election went, if you look at it in the Labour Party, they got far too many seats relative to their popular vote win. Same thing that happened in France. The right-wing people are rising up in Europe. It's happening, and it's happening in Poland. It's happening in Germany. So I want to have a good relationship with Europe, but it's very clear that especially the party that's coming into power in the United States, the Republican Party, by the way, resoundingly, there's going to be a lot of power. Trump's going to have a lot of authority over what he wants to do because of the margin of victory that he had. NATO, I think, is a little bit nervous, and they understand that this war is going to change. So let's maybe they're saying there's a few things that could be happening here, but I think the general thought is there's a fracture within NATO, not with the Democrats. The Democrats will appease and do whatever Europe wants to do, but the Republicans are sitting back saying, wait a minute, time out. This is never what NATO was intended for. And of course it wasn't. And I guess you can argue well, now it's ballooned into something else, and that's good because now NATO is like the police force within the world trying to make sure Russia doesn't take over smaller countries. Although you look at Russia's army, you look at their technological advancements, it's pretty ridiculous to think that they would be able to take over several different bigger countries in Europe. A lot of it's just fear mongering, and that's why Putin's struggling right now in Ukraine. he can say all he wants about the NATO help, but still, this is crazy. They wanted this to be a very short war and then potentially to split Ukraine in half, or at least get a lot more land to the west of where they currently are fighting on that front in eastern Ukraine. So Russia, they have their own problem. But the thing is, I think Europe's point of view is if we give up land, it's appeasement. Russia is just going to be more emboldened. America, it's a little bit different. We really don't have to worry about it too much. We're only worried about stopping World War III. And I mean, for Putin, this is a risk assessment. That's why I first speculated that I think the reason this is all ramping up, and you're seeing headlines like this every day where a lot of these European countries are getting emboldened. Now we're seeing missiles from France that are being used by Ukraine. We're seeing missiles from United Kingdom that are being used as well. And I think they're saying, look, we have to really ramp this up immediately because Trump won. And I mean, it's very obvious that something definitely changed in terms of the strategy with Trump winning and the authorization of those missiles. It was going to cause an effect of Russia also escalating their own situation. I mean, you can see the approval rating right now of their prime minister, minus 38. It's remarkably low. You've also got this preemptive strike against Russia should be considered, NATO Military Committee chair says. Wow. We've also got this United Kingdom and France in talks to deploy troops. That's just the same exact thing that I already referenced. You got Russia now turning to Iran-backed troops for Ukraine war. So now troops from North Korea and Iran. And that's that Axis agreement we're talking about if we do have a World War III. The big players would be Russia and China, mainly because Russia and China have two very similar disputes. They want land that they previously had that they don't anymore. With China, it would be Taiwan. That was land that they previously had, that island, and they lost it during the Chinese Civil War. I think back in the 1940s, the losers of that fled to Taiwan and basically they started their own country. They want that back. And then obviously Russia wants Ukraine back from when they had that with the Soviet Union. So there's several things at play here. And, you know, you can see just some of this other updates. But listen, when it comes to this, I think it's a very clear difference within NATO, especially with who's coming into power, the Republicans, Trump, and war in general. Like when you're talking about World War III, it's all about leverage. And I think they're trying right now, NATO, the current NATO, they're trying to give Ukraine as much leverage as possible going into a negotiation. That's all well and good. The issue with that is if you escalate it high enough, there's a certain point where it's like there's no turning back from this. You've escalated it too high now. Now Russia doesn't want peace. Now Russia potentially wants World War III. And the argument from, I think, liberals in the European countries is there's no way Russia would go into World War III against NATO. They would get crushed. But if you have Russia and China together, now you're talking about something that is, you know, a little bit similar to World War II with the Axis powers. Although, to be fair, you would think Russia and China are a lot more powerful than Nazi Germany and Japan were back in World War II. So this is something to watch, but a lot of this is based on leverage because of the ploy of nukes, right? And there's also a rumor of Biden potentially giving Ukraine nukes. I mean, I think that's just, I mean, that would give Ukraine a lot of leverage because then they'd have nukes, but then that would also escalate it even higher. I mean, that's the one thing that even liberals will say is, you know, we don't want this. You can't play around with the nuclear bomb. So, and it does also look like Russia is escalating their offensive there in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine war map reveals Russia's rapid frontline advances. I don't know if this is correct, but look at this. Russia starts drafting Ukrainians from occupied territories. What? But here you can see this. It looks like they are really starting to advance further. This escalation is causing Russia to move forward into Ukrainian territory, and this all could come down to a peace agreement and Russia trying to control as much land as possible, understanding that Trump, once he enters the White House, is totally going to change this war and hopefully end the war. You could have Russia saying, we want more land, so when we go into a peace deal, we can have more leverage over the land that we want to have annexed or things like that. Of course, there's going to be that disconnect between NATO and the United States. I know the United States is part of NATO, but I'm just saying the Republican Party, you know, there's a lot of the NATO countries in Europe. They don't want to give up any land to Putin, but that's just what might have to happen to get this war to end. depending on how far Putin wants to escalate it. If you are Putin and you are working towards some type of peace deal, like I know there's also a big narrative going around many of the liberal circles that Russia is running out of troops and this has been a total failure for them, then understanding that Trump is going to be in, you want to get as much land as possible. Now it's time to really go pedal to the metal, considering Trump's coming in. When you go into that negotiation window, you want to have as much land as possible so you could have more leverage over the land and the requests that you want. And then if you're Ukraine, and I think this is the NATO point of view, and look, a lot of this is risk assessment. And what it comes down to, this is the question you have to ask yourself. And for me, the answer is probably going to be a lot different than the European countries. And we're just never going to agree on this because the question is, are you willing to go to World War III over Ukraine? I would say no, absolutely not. A lot of those European countries would probably say yes. If it gets bad enough, if they take enough of the land, then yes, we will go to World War III because we don't want to have appeasement. We don't want to do the same thing that happened with, Nazi Germany in World War II. However, there are stark differences between the Nazis' takeover of most of Europe and what's happening in Ukraine with Russia. Stark differences. But I think that's just what the question comes down to. And we can sit here and argue it, but if we have two different answers to that question, we're never going to come to an agreement. If you are willing to go to World War III over Ukraine, then we're just, I'm just not going to be able to have an agreement with you because that's just that's the argument right there. So if we are trying to de-escalate the situation like Trump is, I think both right now, the current NATO, which is the NATO that's controlled by the Democrats, which by default, I believe, is being controlled by the European countries. My guess is that a lot of the White House and the Democrats, it's more of an appeasement to the European countries, and it's more of a, we'll do whatever you guys want to do, and you guys take the lead because this war is happening closer to you guys, and you guys have more at stake. I think that's mainly the Democrats' viewpoint, whereas if Trump comes in, it's going to be, we really don't care. We're the United States of America. We contribute by far the most in terms of military budget to NATO. We should have the biggest say. We're the most powerful, and we're not interested in going to World War III. There's two distinct differences, I believe, that's going on right now between Republicans and Democrats in terms of how NATO is controlled. I think the European countries really have say over what's going on with NATO right now, and they're probably trying to give Ukraine as much leverage as possible. But again, if they are willing to go to World War III over Ukraine, then we're just going to have that difference, and it's just there's no point in arguing about it because it's just a clear difference in terms of what we're willing to do over certain territories. I would say no, absolutely not. There needs to be a peace deal. There's going to be areas in eastern Ukraine that get annexed. Is it fair? No. Is the world fair? No. That's just the reality. It just comes down to a risk assessment. Now, listen, if you have great intel that Putin is bluffing this entire thing, but it's just like, how do you get that land back outside of launching a major NATO offensive with French troops and troops from Britain? It's impossible. And then if you do that, you're bringing those troops into it. And most people would speculate that, yes, that is the start of World War III officially. The start of World War III would probably be some type of wide-scale attack from Russia onto Kyiv, and then NATO responding with troops starting to fight Russians on that front line in eastern Ukraine. And then on top of that, you would get the Pacific probably breaking out with China making a move on Taiwan. And North Korea already is in this. I mean, it'd be North Korea, Iraq. You would also have Russia, China as the big players as well for the Axis. So listen, we're hoping that doesn't happen. And again, that's the question. Are you willing to go to World War III over Ukraine? I don't know what the liberal answer is. I really don't. I mean, I guess the answer would probably be, in my speculation, would be yes. I think liberals would say yes, but I don't know. Maybe some of them would say no. I think some of them probably would be like, all right, if they just get those two regions in eastern Ukraine, we can avoid this, whatever. But there's a lot of people in Europe that are very, very scared. There's also a lot of people that are happy that Trump is coming in because it's going to force them to upgrade their own military budgets, and that's definitely needed. And I think it was going to happen anyways because of this scare that they're having right now with Russia potentially trying to take over some of that land in Eastern Europe and potentially push the borders closer to other NATO countries. And if there is a peace deal, I said it's going to involve some type of settlement with Ukraine not joining NATO. That's what Putin is going to push for. That he's also going to push for annexing some of that land that they've already gotten, potentially even more land that they don't have yet, which could be an interesting thing because he has annexed. He's hypothetically annexed more land that he doesn't have yet, that they don't have control over. But now they're having this offensive. It seems like everybody knows that Trump is coming in and there's going to be some type of peace deal. So everyone wants to be in the best position to negotiate from a strength of having more leverage over the opposing party. That's why NATO is doing all of this, all these missiles and stuff like that. And hypothetically, if you are Trump and you are trying to negotiate a fair peace deal, Russia is always going to have the leverage over Ukraine so far as NATO not intervening. Now, if NATO says we're coming in, then NATO immediately has leverage over Russia, but at that point it doesn't really matter because then we're talking about nuclear war actually happening. So see, it's like there's no way to win. It's and that's the problem with nuclear bombs. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.